She raised her son alone. With a grease-stained apron and a heart full of hope, she faced days when the only meal was a pack of crackers, quietly shared between them. While others slept, she cleaned offices. While the world kept moving, she fought. Invisible, exhausted, but determined. Years later, that same boy, who once wore torn sneakers and used second-hand notebooks, walks into a crowded auditorium. Impeccable suit, spotlight on his face. He's now the CEO of a multinational company. And in the most anticipated speech of the night, he doesn't talk about profits or innovation. He talks about her, about the woman who turned sacrifice into love. And what happens next, no one saw coming. This story isn't just about success. It's about gratitude, about silent promises that last for decades and are fulfilled with tears in your eyes. So stay with me until the very end, because just when you think you've felt it all, the most powerful moment hits. And tell me something, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far this story of love and resilience can travel. The weight of the world on her shoulders. Maria wasn't born into luxury. She grew up in a small Midwestern town where opportunities were as scarce as warm winters. By the time she was 20, she had already buried her parents, dropped out of college, and was pregnant, abandoned by the man who promised forever but disappeared the moment responsibility knocked. She didn't cry for long. There was no time. Her son, David, was born on a rainy Tuesday in a public hospital. Maria held him close, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "I don't know how, but I'll give you the world." Her first job was cleaning offices at night. The second, waitressing at a greasy diner during the day. She'd sleep no more than 4 hours, sometimes less. When David was sick, she carried him in her arms to work, wrapping him in her coat in the back room, hoping her manager wouldn't notice. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment where the floor creaked and the heater barely worked. She'd tell bedtime stories made up on the spot, usually about brave little boys who outsmarted giants. Metaphors that, in her mind, were meant to prepare David for the battles ahead. But through it all, she smiled, because every laugh from David made her forget her blistered hands and aching back. At school, David was quiet, observant. He never had the coolest backpack or the latest sneakers, but he had something most kids didn't: drive. He watched his mother, saw how she made miracles out of pennies, and silently promised himself he'd one day pay her back. Maria never asked for anything. She never complained. Even when she lost one of her 3 jobs and had to sell her wedding ring just to afford groceries, she told David it was just a phase and that they'd be fine. But David wasn't naive. He noticed everything: the growing lines on her forehead, the way she sometimes skipped dinner, pretending she had already eaten, the nights she cried in the bathroom, thinking he was asleep. One day after school, David came home with a drawing. It was a sketch of a big glass building with her name at the top. Maria Corp. She laughed, thinking it was cute, but to David, it was a vision. And from that day on, he worked as if that drawing were a blueprint for their future. He studied under flickering lights. He took on part-time jobs while still in high school. He read every book he could borrow, asked endless questions, and looked for scholarships like his life depended on it, because in a way, it did. Maria never pushed him, but every hug, every lunch packed with love, every whisper of "I believe in you," fueled him more than any motivational speech ever could. And while most people around them saw a struggling single mom and a poor kid with no prospects, what they didn't see was the empire being quietly built, one sacrifice, one page, one late-night study session at a time. Her silent struggles. Maria had never planned to be a single mother. At just 20 years old, she found herself sitting alone in a sterile hospital room, clutching her newborn son with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. There were no flowers, no visitors, just a baby with tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb and a future that terrified her. The nurse asked for the father's name. Maria stared blankly at the form. She left it blank. She named him David because she wanted him to be brave, to face giants, to rise no matter how small he started. Her first night home was a blur of crying and rocking. No crib, just a drawer lined with a blanket. She hadn't figured everything out, not even close. But she promised herself one thing. Her son would never feel abandoned the way she had. She started working the moment she could stand again. During the day, she cleaned hotel rooms. At night, she stocked shelves in a grocery store. She strapped David to her back in a makeshift carrier fashioned out of an old scarf. He grew up hearing the beep of cash registers and the hum of vacuum cleaners. Rent was always late. The fridge was always near empty. But somehow, every time David asked for something, a pencil for school, a slice of cake on his birthday, she made it happen, even if it meant skipping meals, even if it meant walking instead of taking the bus, even if it meant pawning the last piece of jewelry her mother had left her. There were days when Maria questioned everything, when her legs felt too heavy, when her back ached from scrubbing floors, when her eyes burned from lack of sleep. But then David would reach for her, smile with that crooked baby grin, and say, "Love you, Mama." And suddenly, nothing hurt anymore. She never showed him how hard it was. He never saw the bills piled on the table. He never heard her cry into the bathroom towel after he'd fallen asleep. To David, she was a superhero. To Maria, she was barely holding on. Neighbors whispered, called her that poor girl, with pity in their eyes. Some offered help, others judged in silence. She ignored them all. She didn't need sympathy. She needed time, opportunity, and a miracle or two. When David started school, Maria took a third job, ironing clothes in the back of a dry cleaner. She didn't attend parent meetings or bake sales. She couldn't. But she always made sure his clothes were clean, his lunchbox was full, and his homework checked. Even if it meant staying up until dawn with a dictionary, trying to understand fifth-grade math. David was quiet, observant, just like her. He noticed things. He noticed that she never bought anything for herself, that her shoes had holes, but she never complained, that every birthday gift came with the same sentence, "It's not much, but it's all I had." And yet, he never felt poor, because every night they had dinner together, even if it was just rice and beans, because every morning she kissed his forehead and said, "You're going to do great things, my boy." Maria didn't raise David with toys or luxury. She raised him with love, with grit, with sacrifice. And even though she didn't know it yet, every one of those small, invisible acts was building something extraordinary. One evening, David asked her, "Mama, what's your dream?" She looked at him, surprised. No one had asked her that in years. "My dream," she repeated, pausing. "Yes, like, if you could do anything." She thought for a moment. "I'd open a bakery," she said softly. "A small one. Nothing fancy. Just somewhere warm, where people come in and feel at home. And you'd help me make the cookies." David smiled wide. "We'll do it one day, Mama, I promise." She laughed, ruffled his hair, and said, "Just worry about your school, okay?" But deep inside, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. And David that night took the promise seriously. He didn't just want to succeed anymore. He wanted to give her back everything she had ever given up. What neither of them knew was that the dream she had long buried was slowly taking root in his heart. The spark in David never talked much in class. He wasn't the loudest, the fastest, or the most popular kid, but he watched everything. While others focused on recess or cartoons, David paid attention to details. The way his teacher wrote numbers on the board, the way store owners counted change, the way his mother always managed to make ends meet with almost nothing. By the time he was 10, he already knew how to calculate discounts, budget lunch money, and spot when his mother was pretending to be okay. He hated pretending. At 12, he found a discarded laptop near the trash behind the laundromat. The screen was cracked and keys were missing, but after tinkering with it for weeks, he made it work. That broken laptop became his world. He used the Wi-Fi from the public library across the street. He read articles about business, watched free online courses on how companies were built, and soaked in stories of people who came from nothing. And every time he learned something new, he'd think, one step closer. Not for him, for her. He remembered the bakery dream. He remembered the day she fainted from exhaustion and brushed it off as just a little dizzy. He remembered the moments when her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. That's when the spark inside him turned into a fire. He began selling small items, refurbished calculators, used textbooks, even hand-illustrated greeting cards made from scrap paper. Nothing big, just enough to start building. He saved every dollar in an old cookie tin under his bed. He called it the Bakery Fund. But secretly, he had bigger plans. High school came, and with it, more pressure. Most of his classmates were worried about prom or football tryouts. David was filling out scholarship forms, juggling 2 part-time jobs, and working late into the night on business ideas that never left the notebook he kept hidden in his backpack. His teachers noticed his focus. One of them, Mrs. Ellis, pulled him aside after class one day. "David," she said, "I've taught for 20 years and I've never seen a student with eyes like yours. Eyes that see something bigger." He just smiled and nodded, but her words stayed with him. At 17, he entered a regional entrepreneurship contest. He didn't have a suit, he didn't have a team, but he had a plan, a real one. A mobile app idea to help small local vendors manage inventory and payments. It wasn't flashy, but it was smart, practical, needed. He pitched it in front of a panel of professionals who looked at him like he was out of place. But then he spoke, and everything changed. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, applause. He didn't win first place, but he did win attention. One of the judges, a retired businesswoman named Evelyn Moore, pulled him aside after the event. "You remind me of someone I used to be," she said. "Call me if you're serious." He called her the next day. Evelyn became his mentor, strict, sharp, and unrelenting. But she believed in him, and more importantly, she respected the reason behind his ambition. "You're not just trying to make money," she said. "You're trying to rewrite a legacy." And that was true. David wasn't chasing luxury. He was chasing freedom, the kind his mother never had. With Evelyn's guidance, he refined his ideas, learned how to pitch, how to negotiate, how to fail fast and pivot. He graduated high school with honors, and thanks to a full-ride scholarship, became the first in his family to attend college. Maria cried the day he got his acceptance letter. David held her hands and said, "I'm not going far, and I'm not going for me." Every weekend he came home, helped fix things around the apartment, cooked dinner, made her laugh. He never stopped being her boy, but now he was also a man with a mission. He told no one, but deep inside, he had set a date. By the time he turned 30, he would change her life completely. No more night shifts, no more pain hidden behind smiles, no more maybe someday. Just the two of them, living a life they both deserved. And as he sat in the campus library one night, building the first draft of what would become the blueprint of a global company, he whispered to himself, "For you, Mama, every step, for you." Dreams on Hold College wasn't easy for David. Even with a full scholarship, he still had to work. Books, food, transportation, it all added up. While his peers went to parties and spring break trips, David spent nights delivering food, tutoring, and coding freelance projects just to stay afloat. He barely slept, but he never complained. He'd call his mother every evening like clockwork. "Did you eat?" she'd ask. "I did," he'd lie. "Are you getting rest?" "I'm trying." She always knew when he was lying, but she never pushed. She only said, "Don't forget who you are, my son, and don't ever forget why you started." But Maria wasn't doing well. Years of hard work had taken a toll on her body. The back pain she once ignored became unbearable. The coughing fits that used to come and go started lingering. One day, she collapsed while walking home. A neighbor found her, unconscious on the sidewalk. David rushed back home, skipping an important presentation. The hospital waiting room felt colder than ever. The doctor's words hit like a punch to the chest. "It's advanced. If she had come in earlier, but now we'll have to act quickly." It wasn't cancer. But it was serious. A chronic respiratory illness worsened by years of exposure to dust, chemical cleaners, and long shifts in cold buildings. She needed long-term treatment, medications, and rest. Lots of rest. David was furious. At the system, at the world, at himself. He had promised to give her a better life. And now, just as he was building something real, she was slipping away. For a moment, he thought about quitting school, taking a full-time job, pushing the dream aside. But Maria refused. "You will not stop," she said from her hospital bed, tubes in her nose, eyes fierce with fire. "You've come too far. You are not turning back, not for me." He stayed for a week, sleeping beside her, helping with every little thing, brushing her hair, feeding her soup, even just holding her hand in silence. Then he left, reluctantly, to return to school. But something in him had shifted. David no longer had the luxury of patience. He doubled down. He applied to every grant, every competition, every investor pitch he could find. And it wasn't easy. He was too young, too inexperienced, too unknown. Doors closed, emails went unanswered. One mentor even told him, "This is a good idea, but you're not the guy to make it happen." That one stung, but every night he'd call his mother. Even when she couldn't answer, he'd leave a voicemail. "Hi, Mama. I got rejected again today, but I'm still going. Hi, Mama. I pitched to 3 people today." One of them smiled. "Hi, Mama. I miss you." And slowly, the tide began to turn. One evening, after submitting his app design to a major accelerator program, he received a call. An investor from San Francisco wanted to meet him. In person. They flew him out. They listened to his story, and most importantly, they listened to why he was building the business. It wasn't just an app. It was a lifeline for small vendors like the ones his mother had worked for. It was a way to empower the invisible workers. It was a tribute to sacrifice, translated into software. The investor leaned back and said, "We'll take a chance on you." That chance turned into a seed investment. That seed turned into a prototype. That prototype into traction. David moved fast, built a team, worked insane hours, but always called home. Maria was recovering slowly thanks to better care. She still lived in the same apartment, though now it had a proper heater, a new couch, and a fridge that actually worked. She still didn't fully understand what David was doing. Apps and software and investors sounded like another language. But she understood one thing. He was building something, and somehow it was all for her. One day, during a quiet visit, Maria asked, "You still remember that bakery?" David smiled. "I remember everything." And in that moment he knew. Success wasn't just about building a company. It was about keeping a promise, against all odds. With the first investment secured and a small team assembled, David's dream was no longer just an idea. It was becoming real. He named the company Arise, inspired by a single word his mother used often: rise, no matter how many times you fall. The app launched in its beta version, targeting small local vendors, street food stands, cleaning services, hair salons, the kinds of people Maria used to work for. It helped them track sales, manage orders, receive mobile payments, and even connect with microlenders. But launching a startup was a different kind of exhaustion, one that wore you down from the inside. There were bugs in the app, deadlines missed, a co-founder dropped out, investors hesitated to commit to the next round. There were weeks when David didn't know if the company would survive, but every time he thought about giving up, he pictured Maria, alone in those cold mornings, packing him a lunch she couldn't afford, telling him, "You were born for more." So he kept going. He worked in borrowed offices, survived on vending machine snacks, and learned to do everything: coding, pitching, marketing, customer support, all while hiding his fear behind determination. And then, a break. A major article was published in a tech blog. It told David's story, the boy from the forgotten part of town, the app built out of gratitude, and the mission to empower the overlooked. The article went viral. Within a week, downloads tripled. A national bank reached out, interested in a partnership. More investors came forward. Suddenly, David wasn't chasing meetings, he was choosing them. But he didn't let it go to his head. In fact, his first move after the article's success wasn't business, it was personal. He called his mother. "Mama," he said, trying to sound casual, "I was thinking, it's time to stop working. For good." Maria laughed. "David, I only do part-time now." "You shouldn't have to work at all," he said. "Not anymore. But I like being busy. I like seeing people." "I know, but I want you to see the world too." There was silence. Then gently she said, "You're really doing it, aren't you?" David's voice cracked. "I'm trying." But trying was an understatement. David was building something far bigger than either of them had imagined. He wasn't just creating a product, he was building a movement. The app was being adopted in other countries, new offices were opening, and one of the largest tech conferences in the world had just invited him to be a keynote speaker. He didn't say yes right away. Not because he doubted himself, but because he was planning something bigger, a surprise. He worked in secret with his team. While continuing to grow the business, he began preparing a speech not just about his journey, but about her journey. He reached out to the event organizers, asked if he could modify the setup. They agreed. He even had a chair reserved, front row, middle seat, with a single name on it, Maria. He booked her flight, her first ever, and had a driver pick her up at the airport. She didn't know what to expect. All she knew was that her son asked her to wear something nice, and that he was nervous in a way she hadn't heard in years. Backstage, moments before going on, David looked at himself in the mirror. He didn't see the CEO. He didn't see the rising star. He saw the boy in hand-me-down shoes. The boy who promised his mom a bakery. The boy who whispered, "One day, Mama." And now, that day had come. A brush with Hope David sat quietly in his cramped apartment, the walls echoing with the silence of responsibility. Bills lay scattered across the table like fallen soldiers. Rent, utilities, school supplies. Each one screamed of a sacrifice yet to be made. His job at the garage barely covered the basics, and the dream of going to college, let alone studying abroad like his classmates, seemed like a cruel joke. But that night, while flipping through his old sketchbook, the one he'd almost thrown away a dozen times, he paused on a half-finished drawing, a portrait of his mother. Her eyes tired, but her smile still defiant. His pencil moved almost on its own. Line by line, he poured his soul onto the page, the shadows under her eyes, the curve of her hands as they scrubbed floors, the strength behind her silence. That drawing changed everything. David posted it online, not to sell, just to share. Her caption beneath it read, "She gave up her dreams so I could chase mine." He didn't expect anyone to notice, but the internet did what the internet sometimes miraculously does. It noticed. The post went viral. People from around the world were touched by the rawness, the emotion, the story in that drawing. Comments flooded in, some from struggling single mothers, others from grown children who saw their own mums in every pencil stroke. And then came the message that would tilt the axis of his world. A well-known art collector based in New York, moved by the story and David's undeniable talent, offered to purchase the piece. Not just that, he wanted to represent David, to exhibit his work, to sponsor his education in fine arts. David stared at the email in disbelief, rereading it as if the words might change. It felt like a dream built on dust, finally forming into something solid, something real. But his first thought wasn't of himself, it was of his mother. When David told her, she laughed, not a laugh of joy, a nervous, skeptical laugh. "Is this one of your internet pranks?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. He showed her the email, then the comments, then the requests for commissions. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the hundreds of messages. Words like inspiring, moving, and a masterpiece jumped off the screen. Her eyes welled up. "This is all because of you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I am, everything I will become, started with you." She sat down slowly, as if the weight of all the years she carried alone was suddenly being lifted, and she didn't quite know how to stand without it. In the weeks that followed, David's life changed rapidly. He was flown to New York for his first exhibit. Reporters wanted to hear his story, and at every opportunity, he pointed back, not at his talent, not at his rising fame, but at the woman who sold paintings in the square, who went without, so he never had to. She watched it all unfold from the sidelines at first, overwhelmed but proud, still wearing her old shoes, still hesitant to spend a single cent on herself. So David bought her a ticket, first class. He brought her to New York, stood beside her in a sleek gallery filled with people dressed in designer suits and silk scarves. And in front of a crowd of hundreds, he introduced her not as his mother, but as the woman who taught me what true art is. The art of sacrifice, of resilience, of love without condition. The crowd erupted in applause. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not because of the attention, not because of the luxury, but because, for the first time, someone, the person who mattered most, had seen her, truly seen her, not as a cleaner, not as a burdened single mum, but as the masterpiece she always was. The turning point. There comes a moment in every story, every life, when everything changes. For David, that moment came not with fanfare, but with a quiet decision made one sleepless night, long after his mother had gone to bed. The apartment was dark, save for the glow of his laptop screen. The cold hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that kept him company, as he sat hunched over a keyboard, heart racing, eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. He had been offered a job, nothing glamorous, just a part-time position at a local electronics store. But the pay was better than his evening shift at the gas station, and there was a chance, a small one, that it could lead to something more. He remembered his mother's words from years before, spoken when he was just a child. "We don't wait for the world to give us permission to rise. We build our own ladder." That night, David decided to build. He took the job, and slowly, pieces began to fall into place. He worked days at the store, nights on his online coursework, and weekends fixing old devices for neighbors and classmates. His energy seemed endless, fueled not just by ambition, but by a silent promise he had made to himself: "I will not waste her sacrifices." At the electronics store, David met Miguel, a manager with an eye for raw talent. Miguel noticed how David didn't just sell gadgets. He explained them. He made people feel confident, capable. He could turn the most complicated manual into a friendly conversation. It was a rare skill, one Miguel hadn't seen in years. One day, Miguel pulled him aside. "You ever thought about going into tech support? Or maybe product training?" David shrugged. "I've thought about a lot of things. I just never had time or money for school." Miguel smiled. "You've got more going for you than some guys with degrees. If you're serious, I know someone looking for a junior trainer. It's not much, but it's a start." David felt his throat tighten. He nodded, barely able to get out a thank you. That night, he walked home instead of taking the bus, letting the cool air sting his face as tears rolled freely down his cheeks. Not from sadness, but from the unfamiliar, intoxicating taste of hope. He got the junior trainer position and moved from sales to the corporate floor. The learning curve was steep, but David was hungrier than most. He devoured manuals, studied tech specs like sacred texts, and practiced presentations in front of a cracked bathroom mirror, pretending the steam was a cheering crowd. Back at home, his mother noticed the change. He laughed more, slept less, but smiled bigger. His shoulders no longer drooped under invisible weight. They squared with confidence. She still packed his lunches, slipping in handwritten notes. "Proud of you. You've got this. Love you always." He kept everyone. Then the day came when David sat in a sleek office with glass walls and pitched an idea that would change everything. It was a simple app designed to make tech support more human, more relatable, less robotic. "People don't want manuals," he told the room. "They want someone who speaks their language, who knows what it feels like to be frustrated." His pitch was raw, unpolished, but real, and it worked. One investor, then another, then a team. Within a year, David wasn't just working in tech, he was leading a startup. His mother watched from the sidelines, equal parts thrilled and terrified. She still woke up early to clean their little apartment, even though he had offered a new place multiple times. "I don't need marble floors to be proud," she'd say. "I've got you, that's enough." But David wasn't done. He had one more promise to fulfill. The moment of truth. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the stage where David was about to speak. A boy who once carried a heavy burden, but now carried a story worth telling. Maria sat front row, heart pounding, dressed in her best outfit, though still humble in every way. For years, she had worked in silence, watching her son chase dreams she barely understood. Tonight was different. As the lights dimmed, David stepped up to the microphone. The spotlight warmed his face, but his gaze was steady, filled with years of struggle and triumph. He began softly, "I want to tell you a story about a little girl who sold paintings on the street. Not for fame, not for fortune, but because she believed in something bigger, hope." The room fell silent. "That little girl is my mother. She gave up everything so I could have a chance. While the world turned its back, she never stopped believing. She worked nights, cleaned floors, sacrificed dreams, all so I could build mine." David's voice caught. He paused, looked out at the sea of faces, then turned toward the seat beside him. "Tonight, I want to bring her up here." A spotlight illuminated Maria as she stood, hesitant but proud. The crowd erupted in applause. David took her hand. "This woman is the reason I am here. Her strength is my foundation, and so tonight, I want to do something for her." He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a key. "This is the key to a new home, a place where she can rest, laugh, and live the life she deserves." Tears flowed freely, not just from Maria, but from the entire audience. David continued, "This is more than a house. It's a promise kept, a legacy of love and sacrifice." He looked at his mother, smiled, and whispered, "We rise because of those who lift us." The crowd stood, giving a standing ovation that echoed long after the lights went out. Backstage, Maria hugged her son tightly. "You did it, my boy. You made our dream real." David smiled. "No, Mama, you made it possible. I just walked the path you paved." The legacy of love. This story isn't just about one mother and her son. It's about every sacrifice made in silence, every dream put on hold, every moment of struggle that shapes who we become. Maria's journey reminds us that behind every success, there's a foundation built with love, courage, and resilience. Her story echoes the countless invisible battles fought by parents everywhere, those who give their all, often unseen and unheard, so their children can stand taller and dream bigger. David's rise is a tribute to that legacy. It's proof that when we carry the dreams of those who came before us, we carry a power that no obstacle can defeat. So if you know someone like Maria, or if you are that person who fights silently every day, remember, your story matters. Your sacrifices are not in vain. And if this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Let's celebrate the strength of families everywhere. Thank you for joining me on this journey of hope, perseverance, and love. Until next time, keep believing in the power of dreams.